right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. And I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, and I am excited to be back in the studio today, the final Wednesday of May, to celebrate Celiac Disease Awareness Month. A couple of weeks ago, I was with Margaret Clegg, and today I've got my friend right here, Erica Dermer, who is Celiac and the Beast. And my friend, we've been following each other for God knows how long now. And you've been a patient advocate and an influencer in celiac disease for a good while now. How long has it been?
Yeah, I started in, I think, 2012.
Okay.
Wrote the book in 2013. So that's really when things got started.
Okay. So just after I did, and it's really kind of amazing that all of us in the space of food allergies and celiac disease really pushing forward and more advocacy around it around that same time frame.
Yeah. I mean, that's very old school of us. And like there are very few influencers before us that were really on the promotion of like the health benefit side of it versus like a recipe blogger for specific diet needs. But yeah, it's interesting when you start blogging. I'm like 2012. They're like, oh God. I'm like, yeah, I know. So old.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel old. I feel old in this space. I feel very old in this space.
Well, yeah, but we still have to continue to do what we're doing. Yeah. And so we're going to talk about down here at the bottom, the critical need for clarity in serving gluten-free guests. And actually on that same note of being the old school people in here, Gluten-Free and the girl, what's her first name? Shauna. Yeah. So she was posting something about her pancakes that she created years ago. And I'm like, Shauna, I was following you. And like you did the gluten-free pancake weekend, long time ago. And she added cardamom. And that's the only, it was amazing. So she's no longer doing that, unfortunately, either, but she still advocates for it. So, all right. Clarity in feeding. Let's go back to that title. Clarity in serving gluten-free guests. We're just going to jump right into this because you just came back from a conference. And you posted a video.
Coming back from a conference.
And you said, I only want to eat a croissant, but I can't. And this is what I have, So can you talk about what that was? And I would actually, before you say that, I'm like telling people, I'm like, Erica goes to conferences on gastroenterology and she can't eat at them.
Yeah. And I wish that the people who put it together were a little bit more concerned about actual gastroenterology and special diets within gastroenterology, but it appears that they don't, because all the gluten-free people on all these conferences stick together and we're all like, hey, were you able to eat this? And where are you going for lunch? And so it's interesting. They're massive conferences. So it's not like I am asking everyone to make these like large scale changes. I mean, I wish in a perfect world, right? I understand that these are massive conferences with international attendees. So you're like, I'm just trying to feed whatever we can. It's interesting. They're a little different because some of these are food that is available for the masses. And then there is food that's available that is catered by a different organization that's within the show floor. Which if you watch the videos where I'm walking around just showing the endless croissants, that's through a third-party vendor through the convention center, but it may be a different vendor than who's serving the breakfast or the lunches or anything. That's a different part of it. Like conferences are so weird because they have so many entities going around. If a brand pays to have food on the show floor, like some of these croissant people did, we'll call them the croissant people, they have to bring in their own vendors. That's like an approved list, as you know, there's certain approved vendors, but most of them are just using like the typical, like, would you like the breakfast bread that just contains all bread and all croissants? And of course there's no food available for any of us. I think there was like a hard-boiled egg or something available. But upstairs on the main floor, there is food available in the press room for press, and some of that food is gluten-free. And we had to ask, and we had to do all those things where you're checking with the hotel or checking with the convention center. Some of that food is gluten-free. It's not great, but it's
Mhm.
gluten-free. Like I had a black bean salad, and I'm like, wow, this is not satiating whatsoever, but thank you.
Mhm.
And so like the alternatives for gluten-free, at least they were labeled gluten-free, but they're not an alternative. Like they had
Right.
sandwiches and the alternative was a salad. And I'm like, that's not an alternative. But I'm running into this all the time where there's like so many different entities within a conference where it could go
Mhm.
wrong.
Yeah.
For example, the one that I went to directly after that, the one where they served farro, which is wheat,
Mhm.
they divided up guests in two groups, and you were randomly assigned a group, orange or blue. And one was sponsored by the Peanut Board, which, talking about
Okay.
allergies, that's interesting, but they actually do work with allergies because they do like early introduction. And then one was sponsored by Planet oat milk. And so I was randomly assigned the oat milk one. I'm like, well, they understand dairy free. They must understand something. They don't. The only option was a farro salad. And so I
That's
had to go ask the organizers saying,
Mhm.
I got this randomly assigned group. The other group, the Peanut Board, has gluten-free, like a piece of chicken. Can I exchange this ticket? They're like, no. And I'm like, I have an allergy. And they're like, fine, go ahead. We don't care. And I'm like, okay. So I got a piece of chicken and I went back to the presentation. And I think all these people just have like the weirdest way of working around allergies. And like nobody should be assigned a group in which they can't eat food.
Mhm.
Nobody should. It's just it's wild to me that it's 2024 and I'm running into these issues constantly. There
Right.
hasn't been
Mhm.
one where I'm just like shocked and awed at how good it is. And that should be the norm. Like, when
Yeah.
I call
Mhm.
you and have someone work on breakfast with me, then it's great. But if I don't have a
Right.
you in my back pocket, how are people supposed to do this?
Right. Exactly. Well, and that me happened because I just saw your post and you're like, and I'm like, where are you?
Yeah,
And I
let me
just
call
happen to
someone.
know somebody who works for that company, that convention center company. I don't know what her Instagram handle is SUKIPWD. I don't know what that stands
Oh,
for, but she's like,
yes.
do you know who that is? Um,
Suki, the gluten detecting dog.
oh, okay, Suki,
Kendra.
yes.
Yeah.
Kendra, hi. It says this happens at meetings all the time.
Yep.
And it
Absolutely.
does. And I'm blown away because even the menu that I posted a couple of weeks ago at a seated dinner, and it said gluten free, and it was farro as well, same thing.
Mhm.
And I'm like, is this a misprint, or is
No.
on the ingredients or on the labeling? And he's like, oh, that's a misprint. I'm like, we can't have that happen.
And we can't keep doing it. We can't keep
Right.
doing it. Like it's just like
Hmm.
I keep saying like, well, maybe someone in the future will figure this out. Well, we haven't. Like we haven't.
Right.
And it's so frustrating because there are so many people trying, but there's not enough. And it's shocking to me because when I post these things, everyone's like, oh yeah, I just bring purse snacks. And I'm like, yeah, but we shouldn't have to rely on just like what we bring in our own personal purse to these
Hmm.
conferences. Like, imagine a new person who is like kind of newly diagnosed,
Hmm.
or is new to food sensitivities or whatever, and then has to travel for work. Like, people who are salespeople, I don't know how they do it. Like, I
Right.
don't know. Granted, they're not in like convention centers and they can go visit restaurants, but like, I don't know how these people do it because I do it a lot, but I don't do it
Hmm.
nearly as much as some of these other people that travel for work.
Right.
And I'm
Yeah.
not going to bring
Well.
my own. Some of these people bring their own like luggage, that has like
Hmm.
a hot plate and a blender and like all these things. I'm like, that's too much. That's a
Right.
lot for
Yeah.
me because I can't. That's so much for me to think about all that stuff. So yeah, I go to Whole Foods and I go to the grocery stores that are
Mhm.
there, but like we shouldn't have to.
Right. No, Not in this day and age. We shouldn't
Wouldn't
have
that be
to.
lovely if we didn't have to think about that every time we went to a conference or convention center?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I was two little things I want to connect with that is I was listening to your podcast with Jules Shepard, and you were both talking about when you got diagnosed, and I think Jules said, "Yeah, well, here, just go out and avoid gluten," and the doctor's like, "Well, I think that's in wheat."
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, granted, this was before 2020 or 2000. Sorry, not 2020. This was 25 years ago, but still, he's like, well, I think it's in wheat. And she's like, well, because she's like, what is that? And he's like, it's a protein. Right.
Yeah.
But how do you manage that? And even the young lady that I mentioned earlier today, or just before we joined the show, was celiac, college celiac KC, I think it is.
Casey.
And they're like, oh, it's so easy to eat, go out and eat, you're gluten-free, now go out and eat that way. It's not easy.
No.
The video, I think I posted it today, was whose responsibility is for managing dietary restrictions. And it was food allergies, but dietary restrictions, celiac. And my answer to that is everyone. And it's not just Erica's responsibility. I mean, you're managing it, but me as the meeting planner, the chef, you've been notified that, hopefully you've been notified by the meeting planner that Erica is celiac disease and has this. So it's your responsibility for managing her safety.
Yeah.
And providing her options.
It's just kind of shocking to me that in 2024, we're not giving a list of ingredients for everything. And from some other jobs that I've had, I put together events that are for kids who are gluten-free and also kids who have food allergies and parents who actually who had food allergies as well, that they were able to accommodate. In advance, we received a list of their allergens. And I, as the meeting planner, went and met with the chef and said, what do we have to, 86 off the menu because this just isn't working for this allergen. What do we have to do to make this happen? And they're like, well, we can accommodate this. We cannot accommodate this. I'm like, great. I'll just let them know that their allergen will be available, but they have another protein to choose from. Even then, when I went through all that work, the chef came out with a new dish that night and was like, hey, I just want to let you know I've been working on this recipe since we met, and I was able to make this item dairy-free so we could accommodate other people, and put it out. And I didn't make a label for it, and they didn't have labels for their item. And so I'm like, okay. As he put it out, I was like, how do you make something dairy-free? You probably use a nut-based or a soy-based item to compensate. Like, we have a nut-based allergen. And so I rush back to the chef. I'm like, what did you use? Because this is not within our list of all the ingredients that you gave me. He's like, oh, I use this. And I'm like, that's a nut-based item. So I then had to go find the nut-based allergen person. And this is a conference of 30. Find them and say, don't eat that. When in reality, they should have, because the card that I made before said it was contains dairy. Well, now it doesn't contain dairy, but it contains another allergen. But it's like, how are we not thinking about these things? And that's 30 people. And that was a chef that was incredibly accommodating. But how are we just not putting out ingredients? I mean, that's all we ever ask for. Just the ingredients that you're using to make this. That's all. Or have an available ingredient list that is not with the host person that stands at the end, because chances are they don't understand the ingredients. So if I go up and if I ask, I did this in Louisiana, does the roux contain wheat? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, can I see your list? And I looked and it's flour. And I'm like, well then, yeah, duh. But how do they have access? I know that they have access to the ingredients. How are they not putting it together in some sort of just list for someone at the front of the house to manage for everyone? Or better yet, can you just print that stuff? I almost swore because I'm so mad. I just print it and put it on the table. That shouldn't be hard. And I'm not even talking about the daddy, I want a croissant. that's a hard thing to do, because it is such a price differential that when vendors are choosing their items for being on the show floor or whatever,
Right.
they're not going to choose a gluten-free item. I get it. But if they did, could we have some proper labeling? Like, that's all I'm asking. I'm not asking for something that is free. I'm not asking for something. But if it is in like a part of the paid meal plan that I gave into as part of this conference or convention, then please can I have a separate yet equal division of proteins and carbohydrate
Mhm.
meal that is then labeled with just what's inside. That's all I want.
Right.
It's equally hard for someone who's also gluten-free and dairy-free, which I am. So that's why the label is always super helpful, because I've had so many things labeled gluten-free. This happened in the
Mhm.
press room, and thank God they had gluten-free food. But I was like, hey, this is labeled gluten-free. And they only had labels for vegan and vegetarian. And like, that's great, but that's not helpful for a meat protein that I
Right.
just need to see what other allergens are in it. So I had to go and ask all these things, and then the radio the chef. And I'm like, wouldn't it have just been easier on the back of the card, you just wrote what allergens it contained? It shouldn't
Right.
be that hard. I
No.
get it if you're allergic to a spice or a seed or something that is outside of the top 9.
Right.
Okay. But can you at least think about the top 9? That's all I'm
Right.
asking. And if everything
Yeah.
contains peanuts and tree nuts, fine. Like, it is horrible and it sucks if you are only providing a gluten-free meal. I know that you cannot accommodate all allergens all the time. That is not
Right.
humanly possible everywhere all the time. Wouldn't it be lovely if it was? I would just like to say I would love for that to be accommodated, but I understand as someone who's planned a meeting, I can't have everything be free from this all the time at all points in time. It would hike up the cost in the event pricing so much. And it would be lovely if everything could be catered by Intentional Foods here in Arizona, where it's free from the top 14 allergens. That's not going to happen. For right now, I'm just asking for labeling of top allergens on
Yeah.
everything. That's all I'm asking
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
You
Yep.
have that information. Why isn't that
Mhm.
information available for everyone to look at?
That's a really good question. And from banquet captains who the front of the house,
Hmm.
they're like, I don't cook. How would I know that? And chefs that say, well, I make it, but I don't have to label it. I'm like, yeah, you do. And you do have the ingredients, you know what you're making. And
Yeah.
um Amelia Eckes, who works for I don't know who she works for anymore. ISS, and doing food service. And she taught her when she was in house at a tech company on site for their corporate kitchen. She trained them all. She's like, you make it, you label it.
Hmm.
Right. And they
Hmm.
knew the allergens of everybody in the office. So they knew which allergens, even outside of the top 9, that they need to label for, because
Yeah.
if you're allergic to pineapple or
Right.
whatever. But she trained them to do that. And that's the way it should be, is like, you make it, you provide the label, and it should be on a banquet event order. It should be on, you know, a card. I have a little sample card somewhere, that it needs to be there.
Yeah.
So it's easy to do, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Um,
It's super frustrating. That's not even like, even having cards is progressive, and that's
yeah.
a
Mm,
shock.
yeah.
Because it shouldn't
Even
be.
having labels on the, oh yeah,
Yeah.
even having labels on there to tell me what it is. And I know it's even harder and I say it's harder, at least they have them labeled in the Europe, they're labeled, they use numbers in each country for the different allergens. And so you have to reference back to the number, and it depends on what country you're in or what the number relates to, but at least they are labeling for the top 14.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
but
all I'm asking for. Or
I
does
know.
someone have a list? That's all, like
Right.
the head of banquet, and to be able to share that list. Like, I shouldn't
Right.
have to beg for it, and they shouldn't have to radio 3 people in. Like,
Right.
this is taking now so much time. Again, time, but also mental load. And I think that we forget so much about the mental load of someone already attending a conference, already nervous, already worried about like sticking out like a sore thumb, and the mental load being like, hi, I'm special. May I ask for this special list of special things? And can I have some special time away from everything so I look extra special? Nobody wants that. And the mental load that carries upon that, that's why so many people are just eating out of their purse. And
Yeah,
that shouldn't
exactly.
happen.
No, it should not happen. And over here on Instagram, I think your friends from Latitude are listening to us. Latitude Food Allergy Care, is that the same company? So hello to you and hello to my friend Adia. It should, and I don't know why it's hard. And somebody just gave us a thumbs up. I don't know why it's so hard, because you do have the labels. And actually it reminds me of, a situation of one restaurant or one hotel had put out a juice drink, and I had a scratchy throat and swelling and everything drinking it. And they had 2 recipes with the same name, but different ingredients. And so, like, I don't understand why the technology behind the scenes is not robust enough to do that, or you're just not having the time to figure that out. But I behoove, or I plead with the meeting planners to spend the time figuring this out and working with your catering teams to manage it. And so and being a meeting planner and doing it does take a lot of time.
I mean,
that
same. I've done it, and it's a lot. And I am just dreading looking at August, September, October, where I'm traveling every weekend. And I'm like, oh man, some of these places I've never been to their conference before. So some of them were first times. And I'm like, oh man, that's rough, because I have no idea how they handle their food.
Now, are they asking you in the registration form? Have you already registered for them?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is, as an exhibitor, we don't get the same access to registration as some of the attendees do. So I've noticed on an attendee form, there is like, oh, what allergens do you have? Whatever. On exhibitor forms, it's not the same. So you don't register as an attendee. And some of these are so large, that food won't be served on them. So there are all these food conferences, which I just find so funny, like the Restaurant Association. And that just happened, and I didn't go this year. But the IFT, which is a like a informational, like a tech and food meet together, that's same McCormick Center, and that's going to be such a bummer because it's so hard to eat there. And so I end up getting oh my god, why am I blanking on the there's a bakery in Chicago, and I always end up getting like Uber Eats there because it's really far away. So I can't just like hop in a taxi and get back in a regular amount of time. I don't know why.
With the conference at large, there's no way you can in general, but yeah.
No. So I usually just end up getting them Uber Eats to the hotel that's next door, and then I go pick it up. But I do that every year at the stupid McCormick Place. And I just don't understand why McCormick Place is so huge. Why do you not have options for me to purchase or to eat? Like the Vancouver Convention Center, granted, we had that whole issue there, but the paid options for food at the Vancouver Convention Center were labeled gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan. And it's like, oh my God, why are the paid options not available for them to like share what,
So the items that were in the concession stands were labeled.
Yeah. Concession stand seems like such a weird word because it feels like a ballpark. But like at major convention centers, there are these like restaurants within them that are tied to it, and they're all the same catered food inside. They're just packaged differently. And I have been to Chicago so many freaking times, and there are several of these vendors that all have the same thing, that are like packaged sandwiches. And I believe I got, what did I get? I got a salad. I mean, shocker, I got a salad. But there's nothing of sustenance that I can actually eat there. And that really worries me. So every time I fly to this convention center in Chicago, I know I have to pack extra protein drinks and extra like bread and things that I can use to make a sandwich or peanut butter and jelly in the middle of the day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous that I can't.
That is ridiculous.
Yeah. So that'll be Chicago. And then I'm looking at some of my other ones and I'm like, okay, I'm going to Detroit for the first time, which I know that Margaret is able to hook me up with like where I should
And
eat
she just
there.
commented on here. Is Wheat's End the name of that place you're
Yes,
talking
Wheat's
about?
End is, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Margaret.
Okay.
So yeah, so I just made my my flight to Detroit, and I was talking to the
Okay,
people
when are
that
you going to Detroit? Because I'm going to be in
uh
Detroit next month.
oh, I'll be in August. I don't travel
Oh,
again
okay.
until July.
Okay.
But yeah, so August I'll be there, and I talked to the organizers of the event, and I'm like, hey, this is my first time in Detroit. Like, do you have really recommendations? Because they're also gluten free. She's like, yeah, I tell all my clients to go see this girl. She's a blogger, and I'm like, is it Margaret Clegg? And they're like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I already got that. She's my go-to resource. So I'll be using that, but still she's like, there's like plenty of things around that you can eat. And I'm like, okay, I know that because it's made by dietitians that there'll be food at the event that I can eat at, which is lovely. But there's so many other events on my like calendar of things that I'm like, oh God, I'm not gonna be able to eat here, am I?
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating just to
Well,
know
and
that
I
in
will let
advance.
you know about Detroit because, well, I'm going to meet Margaret, but I'm going to be there in June, and so I can look that up. All right, there's two comments in here that I want to bring up based on, I'm going to go backwards here. Nancy and she's a meeting planner. More often than not, a company registers a booth and includes the names of the booth staff, not collecting or having any requested specific staff information. Yeah, that's exactly how it happens, Nancy. So we have to fix that loop in that. And it's even when you register for an awards banquet and you're like, I'm on the table of 10, and you don't fill out who the table of 10 is or ask their dietary needs, in advance, and you just expect them to eat. It's not.
Oh, I don't ever expect to eat at an awards banquet unless I know that the people that are putting it on, maybe I just don't get enough awards, but
You need more. Yes.
Yeah, I was actually up for an award in God, where was I? In Vancouver, actually. And the people putting it, and it was a separate event. It wasn't connected to the convention center. So this is outside convention center. So it was in a hotel. And the people that put it on knew that it was gluten-free. They're like, hey, just so you know, this is gluten-free and this is gluten-free. And like, that's incredible. But what if they didn't know me?
Right.
Like, and it's so nice and it's so lovely to have people know me by my face and be like, hey, you, I got something for you. It's over here.
Right.
But what if they didn't? And that's the thing. It's so frustrating. And I just gave this presentation to a bunch of dietitians as I'm like, I'm vocal and you may know me and you may see my face and you may see me on Instagram. I represent the millions of people who don't want to show their face, who don't want to be special, who don't want all this attention on them.
Yep.
They just want a meal. So you're not going to see them and be like, hey, you, I checked that out. That's gluten-free for you.
Right. Yeah.
That shouldn't happen.
Well, no. And this is an event that happened a couple of years ago, and I posted a picture. I'm like, here's my dish. And it was an empty plate, right? Or it actually didn't even have a plate on it. And like the waiter said, oh, well, we don't have any gluten-free options. And this was at a convention center. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't have any gluten-free options? And I posted it on there, did not tag the event, did not tag the venue or whatever. And I got railed. People knew who I was. Yeah. And I got railed. They're like, well, you should have raised your hand and said something to somebody on the stage. I'm like, okay, that's on the stage, right? I'm not going to raise my hand in the middle of your presentation and say, hey, Erica, by the way, do you have any gluten-free options for me? It should be ingrained into those servers. They need to go.
Yeah. And I will tell you something. Can I tell you an extra special story, or do you want to get to another comment first?
Oh, no, I want to get it. And by the way, just speaking of people who know you. So because of that incident in Vancouver, and I shared your story just the other day, and Mike, who helped you, or who I reached out to help you, he's like, uh-oh, he saw it. So he's paying attention to you now too. So.
Oh, good. He's like, hopefully not at a convention center again. But yeah, I mean, so I was, again, this is on a trade show floor. So this is food that can be brought in by third parties. So this is not a meeting planner thing. This is the DDW, the Digestive Disease Week. Okay. So this is on the show floor are like these wild booths, like just larger than anything at Expo West. You know how
Mhm.
like, remember the Heinz booth at National Restaurant Show where I met you at, where
Yes.
it was just like,
Mhm.
how do people have this much money? That's how every
Exactly.
booth is basically at Digestive Disease Week,
Wow.
because they're major pharmaceutical companies, and like good for
Mhm.
them. That's cool. I actually love what pharma does because they're working towards drugs that are good for you and me and for everyone with the digestive disease. And I love them and I thank them. And we went to a pharmaceutical booth that I had no ties to. I believe they used to work on a celiac drug back in the olden days, but celiac
Mm.
drugs change hands so many times, and none of them have really obviously gone to the market yet. My God, but none of them have gotten so far in the clinical trials to where like I have a special one that's near and dear to my heart. Like, no,
Right.
all of them have failed. Sadly, that's why we don't have drug. But this one company, that's how kind of I got to know them. Is I'm like, okay, I know this drug company, but the woman who is like the marketing manager or someone big up in this pharmaceutical company, she had come by one of the booths I was at. She goes, "Oh, I follow you, Celiac and the Beast." I'm like, "Oh, that's amazing. Like, who do you work for?" She goes, "Oh, this major pharmaceutical company." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know them too." So we are just talking about gluten-free. That was 2 years ago.
Mhm.
Cut to this year. I walk through their booth, just walk through it. I get tapped on the shoulder and it's her. And I'm like, "Hi." She goes, "Hey, I want to let you know we have gluten-free pretzels at our pretzel station. And I wanted to let you know I was hoping to see you." And sure enough, I walk
Wow.
over and they have this random pretzel station where they're handing out like large, like the big pretzels, the
Uh-huh.
jumbo pretzels that you get like a baseball stadium.
Uh-huh.
And sure enough, there was a special area that just had gluten-free pretzels, and they had separate tongs and separate. She goes, "I checked them all for cross contact. You're good to go." And I'm just like, "Oh my
You wanna
God." And
hug her, bring
I
her
was
with you
with
everywhere?
someone and they're like, and I'm like, "Yeah, that was someone I met a year ago who just saw me walking through her booth and was like, 'Hey, we have gluten-free soft pretzels.'" And I'm like, I didn't even want a pretzel, but of course I stood in line. I was like, "This is
Right?
incredible."
Yeah.
And then I found other people with celiac who are doctors, because I know now like the percentage of celiac doctors who are doctors or celiac dietitians who also have celiac. And I'm like, "Hey, hey, hey, just so you know, I know the girl who does this and she has gluten-free pretzels and they're different." And so one of them posted, she goes, "Shout out to Celiac and the Beast for finding the only safe gluten-free pretzels on like the show floor." And that had like major traction, that tweet that she had sent out,
Mhm.
because people are like, "Oh, a surgeon is saying like thank you to this pharmaceutical company, not for the drug, but for actually giving someone a gluten-free pretzel." And it's all the fact that she herself was gluten-free. She works within the company, and they had
Mhm.
given her this like special treat of having gluten-free pretzels, and she wanted to share the love. She tapped me on the shoulder. I tapped someone else on the shoulder. I mean, like, that's awesome. And the
Right.
fact that, but she knew me. Like, I would
Right.
never look and say like, "Oh, yes, a free gluten-free pretzel." Like, I would never trust that. But knowing
Right.
her and knowing them, like, it was so
Mhm.
magical just to be able to eat what everyone else was eating on the show floor. And it was really beautiful. And I haven't told that story yet on Instagram. I really want to. And she's just like such a good person. But you can tell it was like they only had that option because someone high up within the company had celiac disease. And they're like, "Yeah, I can eat a soft pretzel at my booth." And therefore, other people also had
Right.
an option to eat a soft pretzel at a booth. It was really awesome.
Well, and I was talking to somebody about that exactly yesterday. I'm like, by doing that, and it was actually about medical things. It's like you're pulling somebody into the booth, right?
Hmm.
They've now created a
Hmm.
fan of you,
Yeah.
and then you, because of who you know, have created fans of everybody, for that company because they show they care, and it
Yeah.
and it's great that it's based on somebody that works for their company and that person, instigated that. But think about the not the repercussions, the benefits of that, of just doing it in the
Hmm.
first place,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be lovely if all of them had that.
Right.
But that's such like it was such a rarity. That's why it was so
Mhm.
special. And that
Right.
sucks that it's a rarity, right? That it had to be
Yeah,
like
it
a
does.
special
Yeah.
thing, but it was so lovely. It was so
And do you
lovely.
know if she have an outside company that did those gluten-free pretzels, or was it that in-house catering? Do you know?
So they brought them in themselves. And
Okay.
I'm curious how they did that because there's always so many rules about that.
Oh,
And
yeah,
yeah.
corkage fees and things like that. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
That's so wild to me. So we need you on the back end just saying like we have to not have these fees if it's for a food allergy friendly option,
Right.
like wouldn't that be lovely to fight for so people could bring
Mhm.
in secondary or tertiary vendors that are just for gluten-free. Speaking
Right.
about intentional foods, they're my top 14 allergy-free restaurant here in Phoenix. They cater many things. They were part of this like Super Bowl thing where they got to cater some things for the Super Bowl because they were allergen friendly and because they were so
Mhm.
great. And that's amazing. Same with Just Be Kitchen, which is not allergen friendly. They contain nuts because they're
Really? Right.
paleo,
Mhm.
but they are incredibly, I mean, obviously dedicated gluten free and dairy free friendly. Out of
Mhm.
Denver and Boulder, they
Yep.
just launched another restaurant. She's incredible. She's amazing. She's a powerhouse. She feeds like sports teams, that
Mhm.
bring her in to cater
Yep.
for these events because players are gluten free or dairy free or whatever. Like that's amazing. Can we get that for regular people at conferences?
Exactly. Yeah. No, the big shout out to Jen. My niece actually used to work for her.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
yeah. So big shout out to Just Be Kitchen. I used to, and it was, they lived downtown. And so I could walk there and I ate there all the time. Yeah. And my niece actually learned so much from Jen and working in that kitchen. And although she's not in hospitality, but she learned how to ask the questions of people because they would
Mm-hmm.
come in and say, "Oh, well, what is this?" And so Ellie could then tell people, "Well, no, you can eat this or you can eat this," right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like she learned a lot from the hospitality side of that. Then when she
Mm-hmm.
went to other food service bit jobs and they don't do that, she's like, "Wow," right?
Shocking.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, very
I know
much
I'm
so.
going back to Denver in also August, the end of August. And I'm
Okay.
like so excited to just eat there all the time for every meal.
All right, I want to jump. So another show that you went to earlier this year, and we can name it. You can name it if you want to. That's your choice to do it. But one of your posts, and I think it was a reel or something, you said, I come into this show and I talk about so many products that I find that, and you were with Jules and I can eat, that are
Mm-hmm.
gluten free. But there's so many other vendors here whose booth I go to that they don't even know how to answer my questions, but they're claiming to be gluten friendly or allergy
Right.
free. Can you talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think the issue, and we had just published a podcast episode about this, is the oats that people are using. And I like full disclosure, I now work for a purity protocol oat company because I'm so frustrated with the oat supply chain here in America. I mean, the supply chain across the world is kind of messed up right now, but it's really frustrating to be someone who's gluten free in the middle of an oat revolution in America, and not have purity protocol oats in everything. So the oat system right now is really difficult because we have visited so many brands and so many booths at this trade show for new products. And we're like, hey, what is your oat? Like, who manufactures your oats? What are your oats? Are they gluten free? Are they certified gluten free? Like, give me all the information about your oats. And like, we had a CEO that's like, I think they're certified gluten free. I'm like, well, that's not enough for me to actually want to try this product. But thank you
Mm-hmm.
so much. But like, hopefully by the time you launch this, will you at least have information on like, are your oats safe? Are they at least
Mm-hmm.
certified gluten free oats? And granted, sometimes I don't even trust certified gluten free oats. It's so frustrating. It's really difficult for me because I I trust certified gluten-free oats as much as I possibly can, knowing that the supply chain is very difficult.
Right.
I would love if certified gluten-free oats only used a purity protocol oat for their certified gluten-free oats. So far, that's not happening. That's where I
Right.
would love to see it go. Um, what I'm mostly concerned in is that the items that don't even go through the certification process, the items that don't use certified gluten-free oats, just items that are labeled gluten-free that contain oats. So that's my biggest issue. And honestly, I think that's the largest percentage of the pie right now that we're seeing. And
Okay, so
that's
say that again.
okay. So there is the percentage of the pie of gluten-free products using oats. There are people, a small percentage, using purity protocol oats that are like the
Okay.
safest oats, always going to be gluten-free. They're gluten-free from seed to shelf. Then there's a larger percentage that are using certified gluten-free oats. So that means that either the oats themselves were certified gluten-free from the start. It's like they went in, they went through the audit process with GFCO or whoever is certifying them, and they were testing down to 0.5 parts per million or 10 parts per million or
Mhm.
lower. And then their product is also certified gluten-free, right?
Okay.
And then there's this large percentage of the pie that is just labeled, the product is labeled gluten-free. And in the ingredient section is oats.
Right.
So we have no idea where their oats are from or if we should
Mhm.
trust them, because I've met far too many people on the show floor. And I actually argued with someone about this. And I'm like, I don't trust brands that are just labeling gluten-free that aren't certified that contain oats. And they're like, well, that means you don't trust the system. I'm like, damn right, I don't trust the system, because I see on the show floor, these people are just like willy-nilly labeling their products gluten-free. And
Mhm.
granted, they can face repercussions. Look at the Aussie Bites that just came out.
Right.
They can face repercussions. Yes, but only if someone gets them. And I hate to be so negative about this, but I see people on the show floor just saying, like, yeah, the product's gluten-free. But I'm like, where do you source your oats? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Or they name their source. And I'm like,
Right.
okay. And I'm like, are you using gluten-free oats? And they're like, well, I mean, the product itself is gluten-free. And I'm like, okay, so that means you're going to have a hot spot. If you're using like traditional oats, oh my God, what are you doing making a gluten-free product using traditional oats? So if you use gluten-free oats, that's fine. There's going to be hot spots. If you use certified gluten-free oats, that's even better. If you use purity protocol oats, that's what we all want in a
Right.
product. But there's like, you can see just by going through this, there are so many versions of what a product can be just based on what the oats that you use and the certifications that you hold. So
Right.
imagine going into, like, say you're served a product and it says, yeah, it's a gluten-free blueberry muffin. And I'm like looking at it and I'm like, is the muffin certified gluten-free? Were they using gluten-free certified oats?
Mhm.
Like, there's so many questions that you have when a product contains oats. And unfortunately, everything contains oats now. It used to be such a
Right.
small percentage of things that we can all navigate and figure it out on, like,
Right.
Facebook groups, and everyone's like, oh, I called them. They use purity protocol. I call them blah, 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 blah. Nowadays, it's Wild West. We had people that are making bars and we're like, that's great. Where are your oats from? And they're like, we don't know. And I'm like, okay, you're claiming your product's gluten-free. They're like, yeah, our
Right.
R&D person deals with that. I'm like, you should deal with that though. You should
Right.
know.
Yeah.
You should know if
Yeah.
your oats are gluten-free or not. So that's the biggest issue with that, is the oats are really throwing everything for a wrench. And then of course, we had one product. It's so frustrating because they haven't gotten back to us. So it's called Mari Mix. I'll call them out because no one's getting back to us. They had a malt ingredient on their product, and we sent it to Trisha Thompson. We please
Mhm.
investigate. We asked them on the show floor, like, no, it's gluten-free. And I'm like, okay, but how? Like, because malt itself would be a barley malt. Like, a
Right.
very would we to find a rice malt would be so rare that it's like, why this is not even like a thing. So I'm like, where are you using on your package? So there was like this very suspicious ingredient, and we were there on the show floor with them, and we're like, what is this product? And like, we don't know. And I'm like, how do you not know? We're literally asking the people who customer service people will call up and ask, like, we're
Right.
talking to you
Yeah.
right now and you don't know. And they were also certified by a certification body. And that was not GFCO, because I would be so angry. I'd call GFCO up and be like, tell me that what this ingredient is. And they would know because they know everything because they're so
Right.
brilliant. But it was certified by a different company. And so I'm like, how does the certification body certify this and not know what this product is? So
Yeah.
now I believe it's in Tracy's hands, very capable hands. But
Tracy, Trisha,
Trisha Thompson, sorry.
Trisha Thompson. Yeah.
Um,
Gluten-free
and
watchdog for everybody.
Gluten-Free watchdog, sorry.
Mhm.
But they haven't gotten back to her. And I'm like, how do you not get back? the gluten-free
Yeah.
watchdog. So it's just so frustrating to have these like large questions. It's not just like a what
Mhm.
are your oats questions, like what is malt doing on your
Doing
ingredient
it. Yeah.
list? And it's terrifying, and it's just so frustrating to not know. And people are just not giving the information. So I am like, how do we know what's going on? How do we know what's happening? So there was an update that that she had sent out, and it's saying what is malt extract, what is this extract that is on this product, and it's certified by NSF. And so we still don't know. So she put out this warning in what I think April, yeah,
Mhm.
April 22nd, and I haven't heard anything back. And it's just like, how do you not hear back from a company about one of their ingredients? That's
Right.
wild to
Yeah.
me. And the
Yeah.
fact that we
Exactly.
have to like pull it out and we have to do the emotional work. I'm so tired of all the emotional work that we have to do for it to be like, is this even safe? Because it should just be like yeah, of course it's NFS certified, it's gluten-free, it's safe.
Right.
That should just
Okay.
be a thing. But that it
It-
happens too many times that we have to like play
right.
detective, and that should not be our role.
Right. No,
Shouldn't
it
be.
should not be your role. Okay. So there's a couple of things I want to pull out of that to describe, just to tell people what purity protocol is, the definition of that, what that means. And then I want to jump into, we're at 45 minutes. We can talk for as long as we
We
want,
literally could
but yeah.
talk all day.
But I also want to talk about that psychosocial impact,
Mhm,
of that
mhm,
emotional impact of this.
mhm.
And there's something Margaret put up here too. And here's Margaret that we keep
No
talking about,
snooze and snacks.
Michigan gluten-free gal, SNS with boost labeling,
Mhm.
that do not test. But so
Yeah.
purity protocol, in a
So
short little
frustrating. Okay.
description, what does that mean?
Yeah, purity protocol are oats that are grown from seed to store, from seed to shelf, gluten free. So there are so many points of cross contact in an oats journey to life, that could be cross contact with wheat. And in fact, like, uh, if you want to know the testing, Trisha Thompson on Gluten Free Watchdog has like a traditional box of Quaker oats,
Mhm.
like that we all ate as a kid. Like that's like
Mhm.
500 or something wild, or 5,000 parts per million, like some wild number that's like obviously not safe for those who are gluten
Right.
free. There's so much cross contact from seed, literally follow it along in the manufacturing process from seed to growing to manufacturing to put in packaging and then to the store shelf, in which it could be contaminated with wheat. So purity protocol, you are grown from a seed that is gluten-free on a lot that is gluten-free. And I think it doesn't have to have like gluten in the lot for a several amount of years, like for those seeds to
Okay.
grow out. Then while the seed is growing, you also have farmers walking the lot to look for errant grains, like these massive fields. You're looking
Right.
for something that doesn't look like oats, because oats do this and wheat does this. So you're finding these like wheat things that are found, because you are going to have an errant grain come in, not from manufacturing, not like other
Mhm.
things in purity protocol. Purity protocol is like there is a bird who pooped a wheat kernel in your field, and you're going to have one shoot up, and that's what they're
Right.
looking for. But that's the level of like commitment to purity protocol. So you're walking the field, you're checking, and then you are testing along the way. And then so you're growing this like specific grain that you've walked the fields to make sure that there's no wheat in there. And then because there's going to be wheat, is there going to be wheat regardless? Like it's never going to be zero. I mean, you can walk the fields all you want, but you know what a single like blade of grass is,
Right.
right? That you're going to
Right.
find. So you do your best to mitigate everything. Like there are rules, so you mitigate it along the way. Then in manufacturing, it's a dedicated manufacturing that there's no wheat, or the combine doesn't have wheat in it. You know, like there's all these
Right.
different parts where you can avoid to take out the contamination process. So that's what purity protocol is.
Okay.
And of course things tested because they care about actually
Right.
having like a gluten-free whatever. And
Right.
like granted, you may find still hot spots, because that's the idea of hot spots, but those hot spots would be the idea would be those hot spots would be so few and far between, because they've done all of their work to mitigate it.
Right.
And that's truly like, if you're going to have oats in your diet, you should care about where they're from.
Right. Exactly. Well, and it's so funny when I go to conventions and they're like, "Oh, well, it's steel cut oats." I'm like, that doesn't mean they're gluten free. Well, they're gluten
Mm.
free. It's oats. I'm like, no,
Or oat
that does
milk.
not mean.
So
Yeah.
frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So I do want to touch on you posted earlier this month, the psychosocial impact. It's
Mhm.
anxiety, it's
Mhm.
it's eating disorders. And I've talked to
Mhm.
oh, what's her name from Colorado about eating. She had an eating disorder, and you were just told, or at some point you were told you had an eating disorder, right? Because of
Yeah, I had a raging eating disorder, but this was before gluten-free. So
yeah.
that was fun.
So talk about, I mean, you just said, I don't need to be the one that has to go and do all the research. Why aren't you doing it?
Yeah.
But what are those other
Yeah.
psychosocial impacts that you
Yes.
have?
I mean, yes. So there's two kind of parts of that. One is the emotional labor that everyone puts into. It's just draining for us to have to do all the legwork, which is the whole
Mhm.
reason why we want industry to do the legwork, because it's so emotionally draining for us. It's literally your job. Please do it. Please do these things, you know, because it's so emotionally draining for us. And it's not that, it's the fact that you should just read a comment on any of my posts and it's like, this is so frustrating. I'm so
Mhm.
angry. You're having these big emotions on something that is just a normal thing for most people to deal with, which is eating. And I think that nobody understands what it's like to be like us until you are one of us. And then you're like, oh, the emotional struggle behind eating, but also the fact that, like, oh, I can't just like go out to, all my friends are going to this restaurant after the show floor closes. Where can we go? I went with a bunch of dietitians who are like, hey, we already checked out the gluten-free menu, so we're going to go over here. You want to come with us? I'm like, awesome. Again, few and far between unless I'm with my gluten-free dietitians, which are my heart, my soul. Um, but that's the emotional labor that goes into it. Or you're sitting in a restaurant and you can't eat anything and you're just sitting with your coworkers as they're having happy hour and you're just like nursing a drink and you're like, well, there's nothing I can eat on this menu. Like, that's the emotional labor that goes into all of this, and the anxiety and the worry and the thought process and all the wheels spinning takes up so much energy mentally, emotionally, physically, that it's draining and it's just exhausting. And then the second part of that is going to be the eating disorders that are disordered eating that are also overlaid with celiac disease. So when you have celiac disease, you're already at a higher risk for disordered eating because you are constantly thinking about food, which is not like a normal thing that most people go through. Um, and not only are you constantly thinking about food, but you're having this negative relationship with food that is not like a normal thing that most people have. Most people see food and they're like, this is great, it's positive.
Right.
Granted, not now, because we have orthorexia all over Instagram telling us like, oh, you want a pizza? Have some cauliflower and eggs and bake it. And I'm like, that's not a pizza. And thankfully there's so many like healthy at any size dietitians that are out there trying to like fight these myths of orthorexia, and like trying to fight these people that are just going like way overboard with like trying to make food better for you. Because food can just be food. Food can just be fuel. But for those who are
Mhm.
gluten-free or food allergy, like it can never just be that. It's always like, yes, it's fuel, but will I die from it? And that's not an emotional thing that most people have with food. Because of
No,
that,
no.
they have all these issues going around it. So there's increase in disordered eating, which can be um, uh, anorexia, where you're just avoiding food and you have this negative perception around food, and it's almost like your enemy is your food. And I struggled with that far before my diagnosis with celiac disease. And then once I got my diagnosis with celiac disease, I had to go back into therapy to try to be like, hey, remember how we worked through all this thing where there were like every food is your friend, right? And then
Mhm.
with celiac disease, it's like, just kidding, there's a list of foods that are not your friend. So back into therapy for that, which I highly recommend anyone dealing with disordered eating. See an eating disorder therapist or an eating disorder dietitian, or seek help, because that is the only way to get through it. As much as you think you're strong, it's always better to have someone in your back pocket to help you along the way. But in Digestive Disease Week, we talked a lot about ARFID, which is avoidance restrictive food intake disorder, which is like a very specific eating disorder. And if
Mhm.
you want to learn more, there's plenty of papers about ARFID, but we're seeing this more and more with people who have digestive diseases or people who can't eat certain things, that have like a fear-based reaction to food that is increased more than like a normal way that you would with just a gluten-free diet or
Mhm.
avoiding gluten. They actually are avoiding food, and this can happen a lot with like IBS or IBD because you have a fear of it creating symptoms in your body.
Yep.
So
Mhm.
all these eating disorders may have like different buckets based on where you're at, but it's this disordered relationship with food that celiac disease can bring, or food allergies can bring. That's who cares what we call it? I mean, it matters like when you get treatment for it, but like
Right.
just having
Mhm.
this negative relationship with food can lead to these long-term ramifications with eating disorders, can lead to these disordered eating patterns that are so unhealthy for you, and increase that emotional labor around food that is
Mhm.
just exhausting, and it's so frustrating. So would just love for people to learn more about their relationship with food, and if they do have a disordered relationship with it, just seek help,
Right.
because that's we want it's hard enough as it is to just be gluten free, but to have that mental load of fearing for your food and having all these issues, it's too much. So like find
Yeah.
someone to help you get that off your back, because it's so the emotional burden is so heavy, and it's all you think about. And it's just like it was horrifying for me, and I never want to go through it again. So I have to be very careful about my relationship with food, my relationship with my body based on my past history of eating disorders. And you can never fully get rid of it. You can recover from it, but it's not
Mhm.
like it's never going to go away. You're always going to have the voice in your head saying that you're not enough, and the food is the reason why you aren't. So it's a big part of this unspoken emotional relationship with food that not enough people are talking about.
No, and it's amazing that there's, I mean, I'm glad there's people that are they're helping you work through it and helping everybody else work through it as well, because it is, I mean, food should be that thing that sustains you, right? And that nourishes you. It shouldn't be the thing that is like, stay away from you. And now you're constantly vigilant about making
Mhm.
sure,
Yeah.
that something doesn't kill me. And I don't want anything to kill you, but like I said at the very beginning, whose responsibility is it? It's everybody's responsibility, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to an event, because you're telling me that you have a food allergy or you have celiac disease. So I'm the one ordering the food for you.
Hmm.
And that chef that I'm hiring is the one making the food for you. So they should all be just as vigilant
Hmm.
in doing that for you to help ease that stress and that anxiety around it.
Yes, because we don't need more.
Yes. No, you don't
I'm,
need
I'm
more.
up here with anxiety. I don't need anything else. Thank you very
No,
much.
you don't need anything else. Okay. Um, to round this out, how, what would you tell, I don't know, somebody who has celiac disease coming to a conference, and then actually as the meeting, to the meeting planner, what do you want to see? What do you recommend somebody who has celiac disease attending an event? And then what do you want the meeting planners and their catering partners to do or know?
So, I mean, what a big ask. Just
Yeah.
know what's going on. Like, just do your job.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, I say that jokingly. I think that everyone that has a job is stressed all the time. I don't mean to add more to them, but honestly, this is life and death for so many people. Like, please take this seriously. Um, just put yourself in the shoes of any of your guests. That's all I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking for. If you had someone who could not eat something, could they walk through your buffet and have a meal and be happy with it? Could they see an allergy and be like, oh, yes, this is for me or this isn't for me? Would someone know if a food is for them or not? It
Mm-hmm.
should just be that simple. But you have to understand at least, and I would love for them to be knowledgeable about low nickel diets and antihistamine diets. And like there are so many very specific diets for specific digestive diseases for specific things. I'm just asking them to know the top 14 allergens
Right.
or top 9. I mean,
Top 9.
hell, just please start with the top 9.
Right.
Like you just go for that and just understand if you're walking through anything that you put out in the shoes of a customer with this and this and this, would they be able to know what's for me? And would they be able to find something that makes them happy?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least satiated. I mean, like, my
Right.
God, I'm not asking for it to be happy at each meal. That'd be asking
Right.
too much. But
Yeah.
like, can I eat something? So really putting yourself in the shoes of your guests with someone with a dietary issue. And then just being open and being prepared. So being like, hey, what if someone asks a question? Can I arm my front of house staff, the buffet manager, right? The
Mm-hmm.
buffet person. Um, can I arm them with everything that they'll need? Will they have a list of ingredients? Okay, because I have a list of ingredients. Why can't I give that to them?
Right.
Why can't I empower them to be the person that they talk to instead of having to radio the chef every 5 seconds because they're worried about
Right.
cooking what's next?
Right.
So I would just implore them, all of those
Implore them.
things. I would
Yeah,
just
all those
ask them to put themselves in the shoes of a guest with someone
Yeah.
with a dietary issue and like, can I eat here? Wouldn't that be lovely?
Right. Yeah, exactly. 100%. And this is going back a little bit, but Roseanne put it, the labels must be done in a readable font. The font size is so small, and especially if it's a reception and the lights are dimmed or whatever, you can't read it. Right.
Yeah.
And the dishes were then mislabeled. So it's, as a meeting professional, you need to be proofing them before they go out, and I know you don't know the answers of them, but sit down with the chef and make the chef proof it with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, if you don't have labels, again, giving someone who is working with the customers going through the buffet line a list or the capability to check out a list. I was also looking at some chef's list because they're like, yeah, this is their list. And I'm like, let me just see it because you don't know what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking for. And it's just like all chicken scratch. And I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing back there? I'm just like, oh my God. And so I had a chef that was actually like scanning labels and putting them into, I'm like, that's great. Cool. This is the flour I use.
Totally.
Like, awesome.
Yeah.
Love that. But yeah, I mean, just again, is it easy for me to be able to find what I can eat? That's all I'm asking.
Right. Exactly.
Should be.
It should be. Yes, it should be. My friend, thank you very much.
I know I could talk about this all day because we haven't even talked about hospitals. So please.
Oh yeah. That's a whole other
just about the hospital system. I think that'll be my next big fight. I'm not looking for a fight. I don't go into these things looking for a fight, but somehow the fights find me. Shocking.
Well, it's even the articles from a couple of years ago from Allergic Living and people who go in for a peanut allergy reaction and they're handed a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Like the fact that you were handed saltines, and
it's so frustrating because it was for my barium test and I'm just like, she told me going in, like, they probably won't have gluten-free food, but like I had to bring in French fries in a freaking Ziploc bag, like, because for them to dip into barium, and they had everything prepared with like saltines. And I'm like, you guys didn't read your notes. Like, obviously there's allergy all over it. And they had saltines prepared for me. I'm like, no. But if I didn't know what this procedure was, like, God, thank God it was like, someone who had prepared me that I need to bring my own crackers. It's so ridiculous. It's 2024. Anyway, that's a whole other podcast. Literally, I could go on for hours. It's so frustrating. Well, and I'm the lucky one. I'm at a major hospital. They get it. They don't do it right all the time, but they get it. Their doctors get it. Their doctors are amazing. Now, if their food service could actually work with the doctors.
And those food service companies are the same ones that work in convention centers. It's just a different market.
Just a different arm of the food service octopus.
Yeah.
That's my white whale. This is great. It's a great metaphor. This is the food service octopus. The 8 arms of the food service octopus is my white whale. That's my Moby Dick.
Yeah. We need to fix them.
On that note.
Yeah. On that note. Thank you. Thank you so much for what you do.
Oh, thank you for doing what you do. I mean, we can only do this together because, again, the emotional labor of like one person just trying to make it in the world is not gonna cut it. We all need to be in this together.
We all need to band together. Yeah. And we hate to post the stories of bad things, but we need to post the stories of the bad things to happen. And if you're walking through a buffet or the guy complaining about not being able to eat peanuts on a plane, for an hour. But it just goes to show you what we need to fight.
What work we have to do still. Exactly. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it, as always.
So much. Yeah. Thank you very much for being here. And everybody, check out Erica. You can find her celiacandthebeast.com. That's her handle on all social media platforms as well. So check her out, follow her. Great information across the board of everything she does. So I appreciate you. And everybody, until next time, stay safe and eat well, and stay with me for a second.